Welcome to another episode of our Culture Club podcast. It's so great to have you with us today as we're going to be continuing the exploration that we've made over the past few weeks of some of the things that are really fundamental to the culture of our church. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about why culture is important. We've talked about some of the distinctives that define the culture of our church. We've had some really helpful conversations with, other key leaders from around the world. And we've covered a few other areas as well. Last time talking about being a relevant and contemporary church. But there's one other thing that we really wanted to talk about as part of our Culture Club podcast. And really that's how we identify and raise up, develop new leaders. This is something that's been part of the culture of our church since I've been there, because it's part of what you're so passionate about, Pastor Tom. So I'm excited about the opportunity to dig into this topic together. So do you want to start us off telling us a little bit about how we identify leaders?
Well, let me start with a story first. I remember it was in your days when you were at university, and a particular society on campus, which we won't mention, made some interestingly bold criticisms about us as a church. And the comments were this: they all think they're leaders down at that church. And I thought, well, thank you. That's a real backhanded compliment. I take it. Thank you very much. One of the things that we've always sought to do in the life of our church is to give people opportunity to lead in the life of the church. I think the church has been a standalone bastion against letting other people get involved, really. I think we've seen churches that are run by the vicar or by the pastor or by the full-time staff, rather than giving people, just everyday people, the opportunity to help lead in the life of the church as well. And one of the other things that we hear relatively regularly is that people say within the first 6 months of being part of our church, they feel like their confidence levels have risen. And I think that's because we're giving people the opportunity to do that. Now, it's not all speaking, the mouth is only one part of the body of Christ. I'm surprised at the number of people that are cramming into the throat to actually be a mouth when there is so much else to do. It says in the book of Ephesians that the church is both the hands and the feet of Jesus. It doesn't say it's the mouth of Jesus. So, there's so many areas that people can lead in. There's so many areas that people can serve in. When we talk about leadership, we are talking about servanthood. And that is, of course, one of the key factors in the life of our church, one of the key ingredients that goes to making up the culture of our church. So how do we identify people for leadership? I think God has given me a gift in this area, in the sense that I just seem to see people. I seem to see people and recognize that there's something inside of them. I know you guys have said to me on a number of occasions, you see more in us than we see in ourselves. I don't know, but there's something about the gift of God that's on my life, is that I see other leaders and I'm not threatened. I want to see them involved in the life of our church. Yeah. I think my level of success is a reflection of the number of people that I've got that surround me and help me to lead in the life of the church. So there's something about me, I see something. What would you say would be one of the other areas that we go looking for?
Well, I think it's so important, Tom, that you talked about, servanthood, and actually that's one of the things, one of the values of our church, one of the points of our culture, because I think that's so fundamental as a first step for a leader, that actually one of the things that we've talked about is if you think you're too big to serve, then you're too small to lead. Yeah. And actually the example that Jesus sets when it comes to being, greatness really is, he says, if you want to be great, then you need to serve. And actually, I think that's one of the things that really helps pick people out, is when they show that willingness to get involved, that willingness to do something. And as you say, it doesn't matter really what that looks like.
So you're saying that that's actually another step before they begin to lead. They must learn to serve, to follow, etc.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the ways that we identify people who could lead is actually when they start to get involved. Because I think once you start to do that, it says a lot about your attitude. It gives you an opportunity to demonstrate competence. But it also, you see how other people respond, which I think is one of those things, that there are some people who have a natural ability to draw people to themselves. They naturally set the tone in the room. They naturally get people to follow them. And often when you see them then on team, you see whether they're able to use that kind of for good or not. Because I think there's lots of people who've been influential who don't necessarily use that influence. I've spoken to people in the past that say, well, you kind of are a leader, whether you like it or not. But the challenge is that where you're leading people at the moment is not actually helpful for them because you're not doing it in a framework that means that you are supported and developed as an individual.
When we go looking for people for leadership, we do look amongst the group of people who are serving. And you're right, attitude is probably one of the most important qualities that we're looking for. And I've seen, and I'm going to mention singers and musicians because they're a great group to punch, the divas, the people who, well, I think we should do it this way, and I think we should do it in this key, and I think, da-da-da-da-da. And it's okay to have an opinion, but when attitudes begin to sour and everybody is suffering because of your attitude, you're definitely not, quality leadership material. And so attitude is so important. The attitude that we really like is whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, I'll do whatever it takes to do what this is. I look at the guys that are producing the stats in our church for online church, and I think to myself, wow, they've gone well beyond, what would normally be expected. They've gone far beyond what I would have expected and have requested. But they've shown a willingness of attitude that says whatever it takes. We'll give you. We can still give you more detail. They said. I'm going. Okay, stop. I'm struggling with the detail you're giving me. It's great. It's good. It's fantastic. But attitude. What else would you say?
Yeah, just to pick up on that, really, Tom. I think that's a great example of the fact that often people think that talent is what's required for leadership.
Oh yeah.
But actually, as you say, it's so often more often about character. Sometimes we say that actually, talent opens the door, but character keeps you in the room.
Yeah.
And it's easy sometimes to see the talented people, and they're the people who might put themselves forward for the areas that you've talked about. But often it's, for me, the people who, begin to serve, who actually show diligence, who show a willingness to keep turning up. Those are the people that you start to think, well, this is someone that's easy to work with. They're easy to build on. The people who are divas, you kind of go, well, am I prepared to trade their talent for the hassle that's involved in working with them and the challenges that come with that? And sometimes I think that's another thing that really I look for really in someone as a potential leader is actually, what's it like working with this person? Are they someone who lightens the load? Are they someone who makes it easier? Are they someone who's prepared to go the extra mile? Or does it feel like everything's too much?
Are they intuitive? Did they pick up on something? Did they hear a half mumbled request and have jumped to it? I think about the mighty men of David. In an evening sit down, he sighs and says, "Oh wow, really missing that water from the wells of Bethlehem." And these 4 guys go out in the middle of the night and they grab some for him. And I'm thinking to myself, that was just a mumbled request, and yet these mighty men, they heard the thoughts that their leader uttered and wanted to do everything they could to make it happen. The stories of legend is Pastor Brian Houston was looking out over at the car park and saying, gee, all these people are coming in while it's raining. Gee, it would be great if we had umbrellas. That afternoon, the person that was responsible for that area went out and bought dozens and dozens of umbrellas, and people were able to walk in under an umbrella. Now, we think that's just normal and natural in the life of our church, but that's where it started there. A leader heard the mumbled request and jumped to it and made it happen. When I see stuff like that, wow, I'm right there.
Yeah, and I think this speaks to something else that's really significant actually over the years for our church is, leaders are not just people who identify the problem, they're people who provide a solution.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that's, actually, sometimes people think, well, if I can spot the problem, that's leadership, is to spot the problem. But leadership is about providing the solution to the problem.
I've already seen the problem.
Yeah.
I don't need you to continue to point it out to me.
Yeah. Often when people present, well, this is the problem, I'm like, yeah, you think that's the problem? Let me tell you about 5 other problems. The challenge is not.
I like the way they start off. Did you know that there's a problem at this particular point? I go, duh.
Yeah. And sometimes people do unveil a problem that hasn't been spotted before. But actually, in terms of what picks someone out as a potential leader, I think is someone who comes with that solution-focused mindset.
Yeah.
I've seen the problem, and I can help to solve the problem. And also that there's a certain way that you come with that as well. Like you talked about this with John Cook the other week, that actually you can come in a way that presents a problem as though it's critical, as though it's a stick to beat me over the head with as a leader, or you can come with a way that's actually like I want to understand how we can make this better. And I think that's something about tone. It's something about attitude.
Yeah.
And I think again that speaks to, it is important that you're proactive as a potential leader, but I also think that it's important that you're kind of friction free, that you're kind of hassle free, that it's not difficult. That if every time I come to you and say, could you do this, it feels like it's all too much work.
Yeah.
There comes a point where it feels like it's too much work for me to ask you. And actually, I'll just start going, well, actually, so-and-so is much more open and so-and-so is much more enthusiastic. So maybe I'll go to them instead. Yeah. Or maybe it's not even worth the hassle. I might just do it myself.
Yeah. I've experienced that before. Someone asked me once, they said, if you had the opportunity to have a professional group of musicians or a whole pile of musicians with heart, what would you do? Well, my immediate response was, I'll go with heart anytime. I can teach skill, but I can't teach heart. Character development is something that we as individuals are responsible for based on information that's given to us. The old story, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I can teach my heart out, but it's you that decides you're going to be honest.
Yeah.
It's you that says, I will walk in my integrity. It's you. I can't make you into a person of character. Character is something that you bring discipline to your own life. You allow God to discipline you as well. But when it comes to heart, you can't teach heart. That's why I keep looking for heart. When I see potential in somebody, I look at them, and I don't know. There's that gift again. I look at them and I go, "You've got great potential," but then I engage them in conversation, and they can't talk. There's a social awkwardness there. Now, we can work through that. We can help, but there also needs to be response from the other side. It's really hard to engage someone if they don't want to engage with you.
Yeah, and that openness, isn't it? That's so important, that teachability.
Yeah.
I think of the example in the Bible where the rich young ruler comes to Jesus and says, I've done this, this, and this. And, what do I need to do now? And Jesus says, well, you need to sell your possessions to the poor and come and follow me. And I think, as you've pointed out before, Tom, the issue really isn't his possessions, but the issue is the hold his possessions have on him.
Yeah.
Which means that he walks away instead of being open to, I came to Jesus looking for opportunity. Who knows what could have happened? We don't know his name, but we know the name of the 12 guys who followed Jesus. We know what they did next. And he could have maybe written his way into the history books if he was open enough to say, okay, Jesus, I'm going to listen to you. But he wasn't. And actually his challenge was, I'm not prepared to do that. And I think, that's so important, isn't it? That actually we're people who are open, and I guess humble is another way to put it. That actually humility is really important for a potential.
I think we underrate humility when it comes to the life of the church. I look at some of the young people that have been in the life of our church over the last 15 years. Those that have had real heart, I've been able to draw close to them, and they've been able to understand where I'm coming from. There's a communication, a conversation. There's a question and answer time. There's also a time to actually bring something into their hearts which they need to respond to. And some of those things are at times a bit tough, to be able to work through in your own mind and your own understanding. So, I always think it's good to, at one point in the conversation, to bring some instruction that may be a little bit tough. Jesus didn't shy away from it. Sell all you've got, come follow me. To challenge people on the levels of character and integrity, and to see their responses is really important to me. Again, I see loads of potential in people, but because of this lack of character, I remember one guy in the life of our church, I won't obviously mention him, and it was many years ago, but he had such potential. He was mixing with the right crowd in the life of our church that were hungry for the things of God. And then he just got sidetracked. He got sidetracked by relationships. He got sidetracked by, exploring, those relationships. And you think to yourself, how sad that, you're in Norwich for 3 years in a university situation. And instead of making an impact on the life of your church for 3 years, it's a waste time of waste. And I think to myself, how sad, you're in the kingdom, and it could be for such a time as this. And yet, because there was not an openness or a desire to make an impact for Jesus, you've gone off and done your own thing.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that we recognise that that's biblical approach to the idea of discipleship, or a Jesus-focused approach to the idea of discipleship. I feel like sometimes in the church we feel like discipleship is about taking on as much information as possible, and you've got to make sure that you've done the theological study and all of that stuff. And there's a value, of course, in all of that.
Yeah.
But actually, the example of Jesus is not that he went looking for a bunch of theologians. He didn't go looking for people who got it all together. He found fishermen, tax collectors, and guys who were, and he said, well, come with me and I will show you what it looks like. I will teach you. And one of the things that we often say is, more is caught than is taught. And it strikes me that a lot of what we said about what we look for when we're identifying leaders is actually what we know is going to be important when it comes to developing leaders as well.
And in developing leaders, which is our second main point for today, you can't go away from the model that Jesus had. He spent 3 years with 12 men. That must have been hilarious, this opportunity. I remember when we all got together one night at an Indian restaurant after we'd been to a nightclub. Mind you, we went to the nightclub because we wanted to see if it could host a church service.
Yeah.
So that's okay, isn't it?
Yeah, we went to see if it was a potential venue for us.
Exactly. And then we went for an Indian. And we were hanging out, we were laughing, we were joking, we were having a good time. That's really important in developing relationship, and for you guys to see me as well as human. May not have the best sense of humour, but you can see me as an individual, as someone. And I sort of get a bit concerned with some of the things I see in church life. Don't talk to the pastor, don't talk to the vicar, don't interact with the vicar. He's a class of his own. And I just have done everything I can to break that down. I want people to come into my world. I want to come into their world. And I think that is going to be one of the most powerful ways that we can train leaders for the future. This informal gathering.
Yeah, kind of sharing life together, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what we see.
Yeah.
The example of Jesus is actually just doing stuff alongside one another.
Eating together.
Yeah.
Going to conference together. I remember when I was I had planned to do a trip to Paris, and we were in the process of inviting Sam on team. And so I said to him, why don't you come and spend the last 2 days with me? And he came, and we were able to, just chat, walk around Paris together, eat at great restaurants, good food. And it was an opportunity for me to get to know him, and for him to get to know me, and to know my passions about Paris, because if you want to be my friend, you've got to realize that I love Paris, okay? And we did something I'd never done before. We went up to the top of the Notre Dame and saw the bells and all that sort of stuff up there. So it was interesting. But, I want people to know my love for something, and I want you to understand me and my passions so that you've got a better understanding of where I'm coming from. So spending time with each other, this informal way of getting to know one another is a great way to teach leadership. Because I remember, again, with Sam, we sat in the Notre Dame, and I asked him, I says, what is the Holy Spirit saying to you? And it took him a little while to quieten his heart and to come to the point of being able to recognize the voice of the Holy Spirit. Because when you're teaching leadership, it's so vital to know the person of the Holy Spirit in our lives. That we become great leaders by experiencing a great sense of his super on our natural, his extra on our ordinary. And so that's something that can be taught, but it needs to be done in an atmosphere that's conducive. But there are formal ways of teaching leadership as well.
Yes, and this is something that we've always taught to do in the life of our church. I remember these forums have had different names over the years, but there's always been different. I think there's always been different, levels of that as well. Yeah. There's been conversations that you'll have with, the core team, whatever that looks like, whatever name that has, but the people who have responsibility for leading areas in the life of our church. But those wider opportunities to teach leadership as well. And I think in the early days, it was pushed as wide as possible. And there's been times that it's kind of contracted a bit, and then other times when we tried to push it wide again, and thinking about things like, all in, heart and soul as it was before that. But actually, it's so important to have those opportunities for some formal training, isn't it?
I remember once we did this course, we did it twice. We talked about the importance of character and what it means. So we unpackaged that over a period of about 6 weeks, or 6 sessions over a period of 12 weeks. It gave me the opportunity to see people up front, but it also gave me an opportunity to unpackage scripture concerning what character is and what it looks like. But we've had guest speakers come through on a regular basis who also seek to teach leadership. Some of the people that have come through, Mel Fletcher, Scott Wilson, and others, have come in to talk leadership, and it's just been so powerful. Robbie Lewis last time he was here, Brendan Roach when he was here. It was just outstanding stuff. And so we're giving people the opportunity for formal training in leadership. One of the other things I think is important is that we put people in lanes for leadership as well. Okay, we want you to be responsible for this life, this ministry in the life of our church. And to watch people, they become what we would call master of all. They've done so well that now we're opening the lane for them to be involved in other areas of leadership, and that's where we get department leaders that work with 2 or 3 ministries in the life of our church. So this practical, hands-on experience that they're getting in leadership, and we're always there to encourage and inspire, of course, support and help. And I know Denise does her one-to-ones with everybody and says, what obstacles are you facing? What challenges are you experiencing? Well, these are some thoughts on how to work them through. But so these formal areas as well are really, really important.
Yeah, and I think it's so important just to recognize that when you give someone, you put someone in a lane, as you put it, Tom, that it's not about limiting them, but actually it's about releasing them.
Exactly.
The Bible talks about the fact that where there is no vision, people cast off restraint, and there is that almost the picture of like a horse with the blinkers that actually allows focus, and that helps, the horse moves forward faster because it's focused on the finish line. And I think that's one of the things that is so essential in the development of a leader is responsibility. Yeah. And actually when you say, well, this is yours, you are responsible for this, I think that's something that's so key in developing as a leader. Again, we see this in Jesus. He sends out the 12, he sends out 72, he says, go and do this. He gives them some guidance for what they've got to do, and then he says, well, come back and tell me how it goes. And I know that you've often talked about the fact that actually delegation and the importance of delegation, and how delegation is only ever 80%, because there's always a 10% accountability and 10% feedback. So there's responsibility for us as leaders released by you to give feedback, whether that might be submitting a report, it might be for those of us who communicate on stage, making sure that we've sent our message notes through, that actually that is our essential part of the agreement of us really being leaders, but also that then you will hold us to account to that stuff, and that actually you will say, well, not just you'll go off and do it and I don't care, and who knows what will happen with it, but actually how have you done on this, what's happening with this area, and because so often that's about looking after people well as well.
Well, we see how long people will last in a certain area of leadership too, because if they're so slack in giving feedback and they're so oblivious to accountability, then this hasn't got a life to it, really. Someone's going to pull the plug, either me or them, because it's just not going to work. Yeah. And it's just so important. We talk about being organised. One of the things I've said in the life of our church, nobody's got a PA, because I expect you to answer your own phone calls, text messages and emails. When it comes to getting message notes, the people who speak in the life of our church, that's one segment of leadership in the life of our church that to me it is crucial, and I want to know what you're going to teach to my church. And so that's why getting those message notes to me is so important. But it also shows, are you willing to be held accountable, and are you responsible for the kind of feedback that I'm after? That's what makes a leader. If you're not willing to do that, then I don't think you're leaders.
Yeah, I think that's part of the processes for us, developing as well. I think firstly, I find it hugely empowering knowing that I've sent you my message notes in advance. I communicate more confidently knowing that you've seen it, you've checked the theology, and also that you checked how it's structured. I remember one time, and I think that's the other thing, is actually it helps us to develop, to be better at it. Yeah. I remember one time that you replied to my message notes and said, oh, that's good, Phil. And I'm like, well, I'm not getting up to do good. Like, I want to do better than that. Yeah. So I phoned you and said, what can I do to make it better? I emailed you that and you phoned me back. But I remember having a conversation and like rewriting half of the message at least, but it was so much better a message by the time and finish that process than it was at the start. And I think that's where, like, actually feedback is so important. I think sometimes we get a bit defensive about feedback. We feel like, well, because I've not quite got it right the first time, there's a problem. No, actually, like, failure is one of the things that helps to propel us forward. Right?
Let me talk about feedback for a few minutes. I've just downloaded a program called Grammarly, and Grammarly inspects my punctuation and my grammar, my spelling. And I was very disheartened when I submitted a piece of work to this computer program, who comes back and tells me how bad I am at this. And I thought, I'm gonna throw this out. This, But feedback, if you respond to it with a good spirit and a good attitude, it will only make you better. Yeah. Never be afraid of feedback, even if it sounds critical to your own ears. Learn from it. I think these are some of the formal ways that we develop leaders in the life of our church. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about on that level?
I want to come back to something you talked about earlier, actually, when it comes to the informal feedback, Tom.
Yeah.
Because you talked about the value of that kind of personal relationship. But I wondered, to be a leader, do you have to be a friend of the lead pastor?
No, you don't. But I think it's really good if you're a friend of somebody else that's in the leadership team. I can't be close personal friends to everybody. I can let people know that out of my gift of being a pastor, that I care deeply for them, and I really do. But I can't be personal friends with everyone. When we talk about the informal development of leadership, or the informal identifying of leaders, your ability to communicate with me is important. Now, I know that there are some people that are afraid to talk to the vicar and are a bit nervous, okay? And I can help put you at ease. I know how to do that. So to me, it's really important. But no, you don't have to be my friend. But I think it's vital that you're in good relationship with other leaders in the life of our church. And I can hear back from those leaders on your development.
And I think that's something that's so important for us as other leaders.
Exactly.
Is that we have, one of the things you've emphasized really during this lockdown period, Tom, is the importance of us staying in touch with people.
Yeah.
And actually for us as leaders, we need to recognize that, there needs to be a personal connection. There needs to be a certain amount of chemistry that actually helps. Yeah, it's not the only thing that matters. It backs up character, it backs up that kind of capability. But actually chemistry is part of what counts, and people need to have a personal relationship. And that means as a leader, being open to other people and opening up your life to an extent to them in the way that I've personally seen you model that opening up of your life to us. And that, again, that's something that we need to do, because we can never have it's always going to limit the size of our church if every leader has to be a friend of yours.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think one of the challenges, if you're a friend, is that actually you've got to navigate, well, when is Pastor Tom talking to me as a friend, and when is Pastor Tom talking to me as a leader? That's perhaps...
We've had this discussion, though.
Yeah.
Scott Wilson gave us the analogy of different hats.
Yes.
I'm putting on this hat today as Pastor Tom Rawls, and I need to talk to you. Or today the hat is, we're mates, let's get out and have a good time.
Yeah.
So there are times when it's appropriate for me to speak as pastor, but it's times appropriate to speak as just a friend.
And I think one of the responsibilities for me as a leader is to recognize the time and not to try and impose my time on your time. But actually, if you start to speak as a leader, that's not the time for me to respond as a friend. Actually, I need to recognize that, we're in a different sphere. I'll take that, and then we can move on. And, even within the same interaction, there can be both friendship interactions and leadership interactions, if I can put it that way.
And just maybe as a concluding remark as well, not everybody that starts well finishes well.
Yeah.
There are reasons why people don't finish well. And I think it comes right back again to heart, attitude, and character. Where at one point, you've had so many opportunities to be offended in the last 16, 17 years of working with me. I know from my own personal experience, I've had to apologize to you on a number of occasions. Thankfully, I could do that. Thankfully, I didn't think too highly of myself, but that I did come with a sense of humility and humbly apologize. I think that's helped me to look better in your eyes as well. I don't think anybody suffers by bringing a great apology. But there are times when people will get offended, or people will feel this is too hard, or people will feel you've given me too much. I've seen it on a number of occasions where people with such gifts and talents and such an openness and desire, all of a sudden it just got too much. And rather than talking openly about it, they take offence.
Yeah.
And you know, I could think of a number of people who would have been great in the area of leadership in the life of our church. So people start well, but then, you know, Paul encourages us to finish well, you know, to finish the fight of faith. And I don't know, I've been a minister now for over 40 years, and so many opportunities to quit because I got hurt, because I got offended, because, you know, people didn't, you know, respond to me in the way that I needed them to at the time. And I could have quit many, many times, but I didn't. And the desire of my heart was to faithfully serve our Lord Jesus. I remember once when Pastor Brian came over and, you know, at one of the conferences, he says, "Oh, Tom, such a faithful brother, aren't you?" I thought, oh, that's cool. You know, you don't get much from Pastor Brian on some of these levels. That was enough. That'll last for the next 10 years, sorry.
Yeah.
So faithful is good. But yeah, I mean, I've seen people as great leaders leave our church to go on to be great leaders in other places as well. It's not saying that you have to stay here to be a great leader, but they've gone on to be great leaders in other places as well. And that thrills my heart. That's a legacy of development of leadership. So identifying leaders, developing leaders, I think we've had a good discussion here.
Yeah.
It's been a great part of the life of our church.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful. And just to pick up on what you were saying at the end there, Tom, I think you're right. You know, offence is something that's taken, not often something that's given. And, you know, for me personally, you know, if you're going to take offence, take it temporarily.
Yeah.
Deal with it quickly. Don't let it fester.
Yeah.
There's something that needs to be talked about. It needs to be talked about. But if I think over all the years, of all the times when I've started to feel the pang of offence, it's much more often about where I'm at than it is about what you've said. Yeah. And I think that's something that we need to maintain that openness to, because I think it's so significant. And I guess the other thing is just, I'm struck by that actually as we've developed leaders in the life of our church, it hasn't just been for our church.
Yeah.
That actually I think about so many examples of people that you've said, well, they came in with the characteristics that we've talked about, that actually they're not just leading in church. It's powerful the way they lead in church life, but actually what they've learned in church life has equipped them to lead in other areas of life. And that's one of the things that often inspires me, is seeing how my peers have gone on to roles of significant influence, often off the back of things that they've learned and developed in the life of our church.
It's good, isn't it?
It's so powerful.
It's good. How the culture of our church can be a microcosm for our city, you know, for our community, for our society as well. Yeah. That's great, Phil. Good on you. Thank
you, Pastor Tom. Thank you for, as ever, for showing us the way in this area. Thank you for setting the example in all of these things, and thank you for taking some time to explore this with us today.
It's been great. Bless you. Bye-bye.